This video is to talk about Mark Dwight's HO model railroad. It's approximately 9 by about 14.5 feet. It represents an area sort of nickel plate railroad, Indiana. It's got a lot of features that he was looking for in the model railroad. We did kind of a suburban scene. There's an industrial scene with a powerhouse, some small industries, and then there's sort of a downtown scene, if you will. In the background there's more industries and things like that. Over in the front he wanted to have a packing house, and so there's a siding for that. Some miscellaneous buildings that are painted gray. That's the color of the nickel plate colors of their buildings. Then there's a small town over here, a bridge, and then a farmer's field maybe. That might be something that was a remembrance. And then he also wanted a feed plant and a grain elevator. So the way the railroad works, I'll give you some technical things briefly. There is a 110 outlet to the layout that's basically a plug-in on the back wall underneath this air conditioning type unit. Because it's just plugged in, it does not have to meet anybody's specific electrical code, but I'm doing everything with a terminal, so that's as decent as it can be. If a fire inspector comes, it might be wise to pull the plug. Maybe they won't care. Plugged into this unit are a couple of devices. The first one is this cord here, which goes to a small wall wart transformer. That puts out about 3 amps and 14 volts, which goes into his DCC, his digital command control system. The second outlet here goes underneath to a transformer that's mounted underneath, that's set specifically for the power switches, the power turnouts on the layout. Each one of those is controlled by a panel, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So to operate the railroad, basically you come in, and then when you flip on the switch, you'll see the light comes on. There's also a green light that shows that there is indeed a ground and that it's protecting. The power supply here has an output that shows you the locomotive number that's currently set up for it. So for example, if we want to take this locomotive over here, it's set up for number 30. You can see the number on the front of it. And so if I go over to this box and I push loco 30 and loco again, make sure this switch is moved to either forward or reverse, and then when I move this knob, you can see that the train begins to move. The higher the knob goes, the faster the train goes. If you turn it that, it stops. To reverse the direction, you put it down to reverse. Again, you move the knob slowly and the train backs up. It's really best not to back the trains up for long periods of time. Not that you're hurting anything, but there's more of a chance that as you're shoving cars, you can push them off the track. To get 2 trains moving, you start one. We'll use number 30 for example. We'll get it going at a nice medium speed. We don't want to run them too fast because we don't want to cause abnormal wear, and just a nice easier speed to watch. Once that's going, you can now push loco 100. You'll see that it's flashing, which means that it's still recognizing that it's getting a code for what locomotive. Push locomotive again, adjust the throttle speed, and that engine runs also. Now, you're running independent trains, but to stop, for example, this number 30, you'd have to call it back up. Loco 30, loco, and then turn the throttle off. And to attract and stop the second one, again, it would be loco 100, loco, and then it will stop. So that's essentially the way the DCC system works. If he gets more locomotives, the factory default on the locomotive is number 3. So any new locomotives, if you start out with number 3, they may run. If he bought it used, somebody may have programmed that locomotive to a different number or the number on the cab. There's no way of knowing without reprogramming it. It doesn't hurt anything. It just may mean that we have to work with him a little bit to do some additional programming on that. Okay, switches. So each of the switches here, the power turnouts, have a corresponding, for example, here there is 2 tracks that are going to go into 6 tracks. And on the diagram, same thing, 2 tracks that go into 6 tracks. If you, for example, wanted to line this particular route here down to this first track, you would change this lever to down. And since this is already down, that will make these turnouts line into that spot. Now I'm going to throw this switch and we'll watch the turnout together. Flip, and it takes a couple seconds and it moves over. There you go. Second one, same thing. If I reach down, flip the second switch, it moves and throws. So right now all the switches are thrown for the mainline tracks, which means Mark can come down here and with the 2 existing trains, he can just run those. If he decides to put additional trains on the track, you can, store them in any one of these 6 tracks. Just remember to always have a through track for the train running. The most important thing is if he lets a train out, for example, they are marked A, B, C, D, E, F, this set of control panel only controls this side of the storage yard. If you go around to the other side of the storage yard, there's another panel over here for the upper level storage tracks and the same corresponding A, B, C, D, E, F. So if Mark decides to run a train out on track F on the other side, he needs to make sure that this one's also set up for track F, so the train will continue through on that same track. If he forgets to line turnouts, it will cause a derailment because the switch points are held in place very firmly by a motor underneath, and if that motor is lined for the turnout the other direction, when the train passes through, it will derail. Again, currently it's set up for just straight through two-track operation until either he decides to get comfortable, or if he just wants to come down and run trains, they'll do that. Shutting the system down is the same thing. You just go over and you flip the switch, the light goes off, and you'll see the power supply goes out, and that's that. The power supply is on a bit of a cord, so you could put it on his lap or whatever, and he can enjoy running. Also, he may be able to bring his wheelchair a little bit closer and slide underneath. In the box down below is the instructions in the original box for the DCC system. It would be nice if this stayed fairly close because there's always going to be a time where someone may need to access the specific instruction for this box, and it's a lot easier if we can find it fast, if we have to refer to something with programming or whatever. I think that pretty much covers everything on the layout operation. There are 4 panels for Mark to get used to, so he's going to have to stare them down. There's a panel for the upper level storage tracks that we talked about, which is these upper level here. There's a panel for the siding and crossover, and the diagram corresponds with the siding here and the crossover. Some of the switches, let me turn the system back on, I want to show you something. Some of the switches, power's on, when you throw one toggle switch, will actually throw 2 turnouts for what we call a crossover. So that one's throwing and that one through. So that's normal on what we call crossover. So these 2 are together and these 2 turnouts are together, and they're both controlled by another, by one single toggle. And the reason I do that is because you would never in this case throw this turnout and have a train go through here without having that turnout thrown. You would have never a reason to run them independently. And the same with these 2. These really have no reason to run independently. They're wired together. Now when you get over to something like this, which is the engine house and some crossovers, you'll see that this is the engine house and crossover. So there's a single toggle that throws between the 2 sets of tracks, which again is this set right here. And then there's some individual toggles that throw the individual turnouts, this one and this one. And that's because sometimes you may want to come into this turnout but also have this one thrown either direction, so that's why they have to be independent. So this will all kind of make sense as you start working with them. And then of course the other upper level right-hand side panel. Yeah, all the locomotives have been programmed so they utilize the corresponding numbers, and the directions have been corrected, so when they say forward on the box, the locomotive indeed goes forward. I can't vouch for any of the locomotives that he has that are DCC. Each one of those is going to have to be uniquely looked at and dealt with. They can be sent to me and I can program them if you're having a hard time, or if there's somebody local who knows what they're doing, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. Freight cars and things, in the long run, what would be best is to probably have each car run through a servicing where we get metal wheel sets and metal couplers, KD-style couplers, and make sure they have metal knuckle springs. Anything but KD really is not going to give you reliable operation. With that, servicing will not only make the cars roll better, they track nicer, they'll be adjusted for pitch and roll and so on, and so they'll run much more reliably. And then I'll add a small amount of weight to them, and then also adjust the height of the couplers, and so we don't have one that's a little higher or lower than the other, and as they go up and down the hills they'll uncouple. So all that is part of the servicing of each freight car and, quite frankly, each locomotive. If there's any questions, you can always call me or send an email. My number is 319-573-8559, or email is geu30cg@aol.com. I can also be found on my website, www.modelrailroaddreams.com, and there's always information there on how to reach me, whether by phone or you can click to send a message and it will automatically send to my current email. My email hasn't changed for 25 years. I don't expect it to change in the next 25 years. So please feel free to connect. Good luck with all of this. I think it's going to be great. I hope to see you guys sometime in the near future to maybe move it into a new permanent location. If you run into anything else, please don't hesitate to call and we'll work you through it. So, all right, thanks a lot. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.